Hey, welcome to our channel. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss our latest content.
I used to believe our love was a quiet room, a place of calm. Every morning, I woke up to the same gentle rhythm. The soft light filtering through the blinds, the scent of coffee already brewing, and Declan, sleeping beside me. His breathing was a steady, comforting presence in the pre-dawn hush. For years, I had mistaken this predictability for profound, mature love. A love that didn't need fireworks because it had the quiet certainty of the rising Sunday. We moved through our mornings like a well-rehearsed dance. The same brand of coffee, 2 spoons of sugar for him, black for me. We'd sit at the kitchen island, our conversation a low murmur about the day ahead, his IT management projects, my architectural deadlines. It was simple, orderly. We had found a comfortable cadence, a partnership built on shared routines and mutual understanding. A kiss at the door was the period at the end of the morning sentence, and then we would head off to our separate, successful lives. But the cracks in a foundation don't appear with a sudden jolt. They begin as hairline fractures, almost invisible. And ours began with a name, Finn. My best friend since we were 15. He was woven into the fabric of my life so completely that I never thought to question his presence. He was a constant, like a brother. At first, Declan's comments were just curious, thrown out casually over dinner. "You still talk to him every day?" he asked once, not looking up from his plate. I laughed. "Of course, we have for 20 years. It would be weird if we didn't." Another time, as my phone buzzed on the counter, he remarked, 6 p.m., must be Finn. He wasn't wrong. It was. I explained, patiently at first, that this was just us. It was our thing, a friendship that predated everything, a bond so platonic and deep that it posed no threat. Declan would nod, pretend to understand, but his eyes started to hold a different kind of shadow, a watchfulness that hadn't been there before. He began to notice things I'd long taken for granted, the way my face lit up when Finn's name appeared on my screen, the inside jokes that would bubble up in my stories, which I couldn't fully explain. The quiet in our room, once peaceful, began to feel heavy, charged with things unsaid. The silent dinners, once a rarity, became the norm. The air grew thick with unspoken tension. I started to feel a knot in my stomach every time I wanted to share a funny story about Finn. I began to censor myself, editing my day to exclude his name, and the effort was exhausting. One Tuesday night, halfway through a meal of lemon chicken that tasted like cardboard, Declan placed his fork down with a quiet, deliberate click. The sound echoed in the silence. "This has to stop, Cora," he said. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. I froze. What has to stop? The constant communication. It's too much. He finally looked at me, his gaze steady and hard. It doesn't make sense for a married woman to be that intertwined with another man. It's not right. The words felt like a slap. It's not like that, Declan. You know that. Finn is my best friend. This isn't about jealousy, he said, though his jaw was tight. It's about respect. Respect for me. For our marriage. I felt a surge of indignation. I have always been honest with you. I've never hidden a single text, a single call. Hiding would be easier, wouldn't it? But I don't, because there is nothing to hide. He was unmoved. I want you to block him. The request landed in the space between us like a grenade. Block him? Block Finn? The idea was so alien, so fundamentally wrong, it felt like he was asking me to cut off a limb. For me, Declan continued, his voice softening slightly, becoming almost pleading. It would be a gesture, a sign of your choice, that we are your priority. I just stood there, the room spinning. Part of me, a small, scared part, understood his discomfort. I could see the logic, twisted as it was, but a much larger part of me screamed in protest. To give in felt like surrendering a piece of myself, the piece that was Cora before she was Declan's wife. This conflict, it was the first true fracture, and from it, everything else began to crumble. Our conversations became minefields. I weighed every word. He responded with a silence that was louder and more punishing than any argument. We didn't fight all the time, but the emotional chasm between us was widening with every passing day. I started sleeping with my back to him, and Declan, even lying right beside me, felt miles away. One night, after another dinner eaten in suffocating silence, he looked at me, his eyes tired. "Have you made a decision?" My heart pounded. I answered with a question of my own, my voice trembling slightly. Are you asking me to choose between you and my oldest friend? He was quiet for a long moment. I'm not imposing anything, he said, though it felt exactly like an imposition. But I need to understand if this relationship is really a priority for you. I looked away, not because I didn't love him, but because I was terrified of this fight. A fight that seemed to have no solution, no compromise. A fight where, no matter what, I would lose something essential. 2 days later, I came home from work to find him in our bedroom, an open suitcase on the bed. He didn't look at me as he folded his shirts with methodical precision. I'm going to stay at my sister's for a while. My blood ran cold. What? Why? Declan, talk to me. I need space, he said, his voice strained. Everything feels suffocating. I don't know if we can continue like this. I tried to argue, to plead, but it was like talking to a stone wall. His decision was made. He zipped the suitcase, walked past me without a touch, and closed the front door behind him. The click of the lock was the loudest sound I had ever heard. And just like that, he was gone. And with him went the routine, the rhythm, the quiet certainty that had been my entire world. The first night alone was an eternity of silence. I walked through the house like a ghost, tracing the edges of our shared life. I passed the indentation on the sofa where he always Saturday. I looked at the hook by the door where his coat should have been hanging. I saw his favorite coffee mug, the one with the chipped rim, sitting unwashed by the sink. Every detail, every small, insignificant object, screamed his absence. The quiet room was no longer calm. It was empty. A vacuum. My hand, almost of its own accord, reached for my phone. I opened my chat with Finn. His picture smiled back at me, a relic from a simpler time. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the letters, my mind a blank static. What was I even doing? But the loneliness was a physical ache in my chest, a crushing weight. I took a shaky breath and typed, "Can you come over? I just need to talk." I wanted company. I wanted someone who wouldn't judge me, someone who knew the Cora that existed before all of this. The message was a flare shot into the darkness. He replied in minutes. "Be there soon." I lay down on the sofa, the same sofa where Declan and I used to watch movies, and closed my eyes. For the first time in my adult life, I felt completely and utterly out of control. And the worst part, the sickening feeling coiling in my gut, was the thought that maybe, just maybe, I had helped build the path that led me here. The confusion was a storm inside my head. I still loved Declan. I did, but something else in me screamed for understanding, for acceptance, for a place where I could just be, without having to justify my own heart. The doorbell rang a little after 9. When I heard it, a strange pressure built in my chest, a premonition, a feeling that something was about to shift, irrevocably. I opened the door with a fragile smile, the kind you force just to keep the tears from falling. Finn didn't say anything at first. He just stepped inside and pulled me into a hug, a tight, solid hug that felt like it was trying to hold all my shattered pieces together. I buried my face in his shoulder and breathed in the familiar scent of his jacket, a scent of friendship and 20 years of history. We sat on the couch. The TV was on, some mindless reality show, the sound of flimsy blanket over the silence. Neither of us was watching. I tried to make small talk, to talk about work, about anything trivial, but each word felt like a stone in my mouth. Finn just listened. He was always good at that. He knew when to speak, and when simply being present was enough. And that night, his presence was everything I thought I needed. Finally, the words came spilling out, a torrent of confusion and pain. I told him everything, that Declan had left, that it had all started because of him, because of our friendship, that I didn't know how to handle it, how to fix it, and now I was here, alone, trying to figure out how my perfect, orderly life had spiraled out of control so fast. He ran a hand through his hair, his expression thoughtful. "I always worried I was an obstacle, Cora," he said quietly. "I just never knew what to do about it." I shook my head, the tears finally starting to fall. "You're not the problem. The blame is mine, for avoiding the hard conversations, for trying to keep everything perfectly balanced, without realizing there was no balance left." As I spoke, the dam broke. I wasn't just crying over the words. I was crying for what I couldn't say. The crushing sense of loss, the regret for not listening to Declan better, for not seeing the pain behind his anger, and the profound, disorienting discomfort of finding solace in the very person he considered a threat. Finn reached out and took my hand. I didn't pull back. Our fingers intertwined, a natural, easy fit. It was a gesture we'd made 1,000 times before, a casual touch between friends. But tonight, it carried a different weight. A new meaning hung in the air between us. We looked at each other, and the world seemed to fall away. It wasn't a romantic gaze, not yet. But it wasn't just friendship anymore, either. It was something else, a reflection of two broken people, adrift in the same chaos, looking for an anchor. He leaned in, slowly. My mind screamed, no. A part of me, the part that still belonged to Declan, recoiled in horror. I thought of my husband. I thought of his accusations, his demands, the request to cut contact, the suitcase being closed with such finality. But then I thought of how many times I had swallowed my own feelings to keep the peace, how I had stayed silent to maintain the illusion of normal. I thought of the loneliness that had been gnawing at me for months, and I didn't pull away. The kiss was gentle, tentative, laced with guilt. Nothing about it was planned. It was pure impulse, need, an escape from the crushing weight of my own life. And in that room, which still held the ghost of my marriage, the kiss turned into something more. Finn and I stopped being just friends. When I woke up, the first thing I felt wasn't warmth, but a deep, chilling dread. I turned my head. Finn was sleeping beside me, his head on Declan's pillow. His features were peaceful, as if he believed this moment was a new beginning. But inside me, something was already dead. My heart felt like a tight, cold note. I sat up on the edge of the bed I had shared with my husband for 8 years, and ran my hands over my face, trying to scrub away the memory of the night before. I tried to pinpoint the exact moment I had lost control of myself. Was it when Declan left, or long before that? I dressed quietly, my movements stiff and robotic, trying not to wake him. I went into the living room, the scene of the crime, and sat on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen. My mind was a relentless carousel of thoughts. What had happened was real, irreversible, and worse, it was something I couldn't even justify with feelings. This wasn't about love for Finn. It was about my own weakness, about confusion, about the desperate, selfish need to feel that someone, anyone, was still there. Declan's words about loyalty and respect echoed in my ears. The accusations that had sounded so unfair at the time. How could I ever explain this? Not to him, but to myself? After everything he had asked, after all my denials and reassurances, I had done the one thing he feared most. I had become the person he always suspected I was. Finn woke up shortly after and found me there. He sat beside me, his hair messy, his expression uncertain. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. I couldn't look at him. I just gave a vague shrug, my gaze lost somewhere in the middle distance. He understood. He didn't press. "I'm here for you," he said. "You can count on me." But his words felt like poison. Part of me wanted to cling to that support, to hide in it. But another, stronger part felt an unbearable weight for crossing a line I should never have even approached. Not for Declan, for myself. When Finn finally left, the silence he left behind was even heavier than before. The door closed, and I felt something inside me click shut as well. I took a long, hot shower, trying to wash the night off my skin, but the guilt was indelible. I got back into the bed where it had all happened and stared at the ceiling. I thought about calling Declan. What would I even say? "You were right. You were right all along. I did exactly what I swore I never would." The thought was suffocating. I had not only lost my husband, but I had also corrupted a friendship that had been a pillar of my life for 2 decades. I felt hollowed out, exhausted, like every choice I had made that night had demanded a price far too high to pay. I tried to sleep, but my mind replayed every gesture, every word, every second. That night, I didn't cry. The crying would come later. What I felt was a profound numbness, a detachment, as if I were watching a nightmare unfold and was just waiting to wake up. But reality was harsh and unyielding. I had betrayed the trust of the man I loved. And in doing so, I had betrayed myself. And that was a pain no amount of tears could ever erase. The days that followed were a blur of functional numbness. My body went to work. It sat in meetings, delivered reports, reviewed blueprints. I nodded, I smiled, I said the right things. But my mind was somewhere else entirely, trapped in the living room of my apartment, replaying that one catastrophic night. Guilt was a silent passenger, a constant weight on my shoulders. There was no one to tell. How could I? Admitting it out loud would make it even more real, more solid. So I carried the secret alone, a toxic stone in my stomach. I felt split in two, One part of me desperately tried to rationalize it as a single, isolated mistake. The other part knew, with chilling certainty, that this mistake had consequences that would ripple through the rest of my life. At home, the silence was an active presence. The apartment felt colder, bigger. Time stretched and warped, each passing hour pushing me closer to a point of no return. I started avoiding Finn. I answered his texts with one-word replies. I made up excuses about being busy with work. I moved his chat icon off my phone's main screen. I was afraid of what I might feel if I saw him again. But mostly, I was ashamed. A deep, gut-wrenching shame that couldn't be fixed with an apology. To distract myself, I began to purge the apartment. I threw myself into organizing, a frantic attempt to impose order on my chaotic inner world. I pulled old clothes from the closet, boxed up books for donation, rearranged furniture. I needed to keep my hands busy, to keep my mind from spiraling. But in trying to clear out the clutter, I ended up rummaging through the memories that hurt the most. That's when I found it. It was in the back of a drawer in Declan's nightstand, tucked beneath some old paperbacks. A simple black notebook. It was thick, its edges worn, clearly used for a long time. I assumed it was just an old work journal. Curious, I opened it, expecting to find to-do lists or technical notes. But from the very first page, my heart stopped. The paragraphs were dated. They were confessions. Reflections. They were fragments of a soul that my husband rarely, if ever, showed me. With my pulse hammering in my ears, I sank to the floor and began to read. My own name appeared here and there. But it was the story from before me that seized my breath. I discovered that Declan had been cheated on before. Years ago, long before we met, a former fiancée, a woman he had planned to marry, had betrayed him, with someone close to him. It wasn't just infidelity, it was a fundamental shattering of his world. In his own neat, controlled handwriting, Declan wrote about how it had taken him years to trust anyone again, how he had to relearn how to let his guard down, how every act of intimacy, every shared vulnerability, required a conscious effort to fight back the paranoia and fear. Reading those pages was like being struck, over and over again. I remembered every time he had questioned me about Finn, every request for boundaries, every conversation where he used the word respect, and I had dismissed it as him being possessive or exaggerating. It wasn't just jealousy, it was terror. It was a deep, primal fear of reliving the single most painful experience of his life. The experience that had almost destroyed his ability to love. I was suddenly facing a truth I had never once considered. I hadn't been malicious, but I had been careless with his wound. I had committed a profound act of emotional neglect. By invalidating his feelings, by refusing to see the history behind his requests, I had held his old scars open and poured salt in them. I had, piece by piece, forced him back into the nightmare he had fought so hard to escape. I closed the journal, my hands trembling. Then I laid my head down on the cold hardwood floor, and I cried. I cried until my throat was raw, and my eyes were swollen shut. I wasn't just crying for my betrayal with Finn anymore. I was crying for my ignorance. For ignoring the silent story of the man who shared my life. For not seeing the signs. For putting my own pride and my own desires above his very real, very deep pain. And more than that, for realizing, with a sickening lurch, that this was a pattern. I had always taken the easy road, avoiding discomfort, preserving a fragile peace. And now, I was standing in the ruins of a life that my own negligence had helped tear down. The phone rang in the middle of the afternoon. Several days later, Declan's name flashed on the screen. My heart seized. His voice was dry, direct. "Cora, I think we need to meet." I agreed, my own voice a tight whisper. I spent the next 24 hours guessing. Had he changed his mind? Or was this the final nail in the coffin? We met at a sterile coffee shop, a neutral ground. He looked tired, but calm. His eyes, however, were guarded, like windows with the storm shutters pulled down. He spoke first. "I've done a lot of thinking," he said, stirring a coffee he wasn't drinking. "And I think we should end this. I can't live in a house where doubt is a permanent resident. The emotional toll is too high. I just want peace, Cora, a simple life." I listened without interrupting, my hands clenched into fists in my lap. When he finished, I took a deep, shaky breath. "I found your journal," I said. His head snapped up, the calmness in his eyes replaced by a flash of anger. "What? I know I shouldn't have." I rushed on, the words tumbling out. "It was an invasion of your privacy, and I am so So sorry for that. But I read it, Declan. I read every page. And I finally understand. Tears welled in my eyes. I understand what you were carrying. The wounds you had. I am so ashamed that I never saw it. That I never gave you the care you deserve. How dare you, he said, his voice rising. That was not for you. I never wanted anyone to read that. He started to get up, his chair scraping against the floor. I reached across the table and grabbed his arm. Please, I begged. I know you're angry. I don't expect forgiveness for that. I just want you to know that I finally see what you were trying to tell me. All this time. My voice broke. Please, give me a second chance. Give us a second chance. If I ever had to make that choice again, between preserving a friendship and preserving our marriage, I would choose you. In a heartbeat, and that's what I'm doing right now. I am choosing you. Even if it's already too late. He stood frozen for a long moment, my hand on his arm. The anger in his eyes slowly receded, replaced by a deep, weary sadness. He looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time in weeks, I saw a flicker of the man I marry. Are you sure? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Yes, I said, a desperate hope blooming in my chest. I'm sure. I'm ready to rebuild everything. From scratch. He took a deep breath, and when he finally answered, the words were the most beautiful I had ever heard. Okay, he said, let's try. I still love you, Cora, and if you're choosing me now, I'm willing to stay. A smile, watery and weak, started to form on my face. But before it could fully bloom, I lowered my head. The weight of my other secret, the heavier one, pressed down on me. I knew, with absolute certainty, that if I kept it quiet, I would be building our new beginning on the same rotten foundation that had destroyed us. It would be a lie. Another act of neglect. I raised my eyes to meet his. My voice faltered. I had to force the words out, each one a shard of glass in my throat. Declan, there's something else you need to know. He waited, his expression open, hopeful. The night you left, I slept with Finn. The hope in his eyes vanished. It didn't just fade, it was extinguished, instantly, leaving behind a complete and terrifying blankness. He slowly, mechanically, pulled his arm from my grasp and stood up from the chair, as if moving through water. He repeated the sentence, not as a question, but as if trying to make it real. You slept with him. I could only manage a nod, a whispered, yes. Declan closed his eyes. He took one long, slow breath, and when he opened them again, he was a different person. The man I knew was gone. In his place was a stranger, his face a mask of cold, hard certainty. He didn't yell. He didn't cause a scene. He just looked at me, his gaze passing right through me, and said two sentences. My lawyer will get in touch with you. I'll be moving forward with the divorce. And then he turned and walked out of the coffee shop, out of my life, without ever looking back. The weeks that followed were a quiet, painful blur. The divorce was swift and bloodless. Declan wanted no discussion, no negotiation. He signed the papers. His lawyer handled the rest. When the official envelope arrived, I held the decree in my hands for a long time, the paper feeling impossibly heavy. It was real. The marriage had ended, not with a bang, but with the sterile rustle of legal documents. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects, staying late, anything to occupy the screaming silence in my mind. But at night, the apartment was a tomb of memories. Every corner held a ghost of him. The way he used to toss his coat over that chair, the way he left his chipped mug by the sink, the soft sound of his breathing when he was tired. Everything was absence. And the ache of it was constant. I hadn't just lost a husband. I had lost a good man. A man who had loved me sincerely, even while carrying the weight of his own broken past. It was in the midst of this hollow existence that Finn returned. He called, said he needed to see me. I agreed, partly out of a numb curiosity, partly because the gaping hole in my life felt too vast to bear alone. He arrived looking different. There was a new intensity in his eyes, a mixture of hope and fear. He told me he'd started therapy in the past few weeks, that he had learned a lot about himself, and that after that night we spent together, he was finally certain of what he felt. He looked right at me, his gaze unwavering. I've always loved you, Cora, since high school. I never had the courage to say it. I settled for being around, for watching you with other people. But that night, I knew. You're the woman of my life. I listened in silence. I felt something tighten inside me, but it wasn't love. It wasn't even affection. It was exhaustion, frustration. It was the weight of all the things left unsaid for 20 years, all the actions never taken. When he finished, I looked at him, my voice firm, clear, and for the first time in a long time, completely sure of itself. You had your whole life to tell me that, Finn. Years. You had years when I was single, years when I was happy, years when I was just me. And you waited until I was broken, until my marriage had shattered and I had no ground left to stand on, to finally declare yourself. I shook my head, a sad, bitter smile on my lips. I'm sorry, but I don't want that. I don't want a man who only makes a move when he's sure he can't lose. I want someone who fights for me when there's still something to save. Someone of action. And you were never that someone. He lowered his head. He didn't argue. He knew I was right. He just thanked me for listening, and left. Declan moved on. Quietly. He never posted anything on social media, never sent an angry text, never looked back. Through a mutual friend, I heard he had moved to a smaller town a few hours away. He had found the peace he was always looking for. As for me, I still cried sometimes. In the quiet of the night, I still thought about all the things that could have been, but I also understood that this pain, this tearing down of my entire world, was part of a necessary growth. I was rebuilding, slowly, one day at a time. And Finn, he continued with his therapy, determined to understand himself before he ever tried to love someone else. And that's how our story ended. No grand reconciliation, no classic happy ending, just spoken truths, open wounds, and 3 separate paths stretching out into an unknown future. Because sometimes, the hardest and most important lesson in life is realizing that losing everything you thought you wanted can be the beginning of truly finding yourself.